I'm Richard Pryor, and I urge you to watch South Africa Now.
Global Vision presents the television news magazine of Southern Africa.
It doesn't exist on television, and it doesn't exist.
I would actually appeal to the world that information is there and can be found.
Because it is important that people know what is happening.
This week, South Africa Now presents these stories. Forced removals. This video, shot clandestinely from the air, shows the destruction of a South African town. We have a report.
South Africa is one country, and the only solution is not forced incorporation, is for the South African government to stop dividing our country and accept the concept of one united, non-racial, democratic South Africa.
Lethal Weapon 3. That's what we're calling a South Africa Now exclusive look at how Pretoria peddles its military hardware worldwide. We have the tape never intended for television audiences.
Arms Corps' first function is to provide all the armaments and military equipment South Africa needs as efficiently and economically as possible.
And in our culture section, a new play called Gori, about a young South African woman's quest to find her identity.
What's exciting is after the show, people tell us that I'm educated. I know something about Africa. I know something about myself.
All of these stories and more this week on South Africa Now. But first, the latest news with Fana, Kekana and Carolyn Craven.
Dumelang. Bloody vigilante violence in the townships of South Africa's Natal Province has claimed 18 lives in a fresh outbreak of politically motivated killings that the South African government will not let the press report.
The violence is centered near this Natal city of Pietermaritzburg. In early December, at least 18 people were left dead in a campaign of terror by vigilantes, allegedly assisted by police. We have no pictures of the victims, as the government is not allowing reporters in the area. But newspaper reports in South Africa say violence is mounting. 2,000 people have died in the past 2 years. Michael Clough of the Council on Foreign Relations visited Natal earlier this year.
The problem there right now today is the government has not shown an interest in trying to resolve it. In fact, the police have been accused, I think probably correctly, of aiding and abetting the Inkatha forces in the struggle.
Observers say the vigilantes are supporters of Inkatha, the tribally based movement led by Chief Gatsha Buthelezi, seen here addressing a rally last summer. Buthelezi denies the charges. Often erroneously labeled black on black or tribal violence, the heart of the conflict is political. Members of the United Democratic Front have long been at loggerheads with Buthelezi over his support for the homeland system devised by Pretoria. It is important to note that members of both groups belong to the Zulu tribe. Dean Farisani of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Southern Africa.
But the tragic thing about it all is that most of these people that have died are people that belong to the Zulu tribe. And that again contradicts the allegation that COSATU, UDF, ANC are in conflict with the Zulu people. You look at Pietermaritzburg, you look at KwaMashu, you look at Inanda. These are democratic, progressive Zulu people who are part of the mass democratic movement that wants to bring apartheid to an end. And I think because young people have come forward, they've come in front, they've been the easy targets for the Inkatha violence.
Finally, this sobering thought. Reports say the violence in Natal has claimed more lives in the last 2 years than Lebanon's bloody civil war. For South Africa Now, this is Jay Weiss reporting.
Also from South Africa, the largest gathering of anti-apartheid groups since 1955 met in Johannesburg on Saturday, December 9th. Called the Conference for a Democratic Future, 4,500 delegates representing a broad range of the anti-apartheid movement were there. While there is disagreement about how to negotiate with the government between the mass democratic movement and the Black consciousness movement, the meeting approved a resolution saying they would talk to de Klerk if he proves he's serious about democracy.
Mr. de Klerk, your back is to the wall. Come, feel the power of unity and action with the people of South Africa instead of against them.
We'll have more on this story in coming weeks. More accusations of police involvement in South African death squads as new charges seem to surface almost daily. But now, State President de Klerk has rejected calls that he appoint an independent commission to investigate charges that these police-sponsored death squads assassinated opponents of apartheid. De Klerk said, quote, "The government has full confidence that the tried and respected prosecution mechanisms of the state will be sufficient to bring the accused before the court impartially and objectively." 5 more policemen have been arrested, though the government's own investigation is focusing on what it calls extremists. Analysts say de Klerk is attempting to prevent the exposure of official police involvement.
People in South Africa have always, or have believed for a long time, that the police, the military intelligence, the army are all involved in legal and illegal killing. Legal killing because there's a highest rate of executions in the world in South Africa. Illegal killing because if you can't get the man in court or the woman in court, then you get rid of them in some other way. And I think that de Klerk is now genuinely afraid that if you open up that can of worms, it will really expose the whole vicious system to the international community, and he can't afford that.
Forced removals are one of the least understood aspects of apartheid. They are the result of government policies to reduce the number of blacks in white South Africa. One recently affected area is the village of Ngoqweni, where popular resistance was met by police demolition squads.
Ciskei police came in with bulldozers, razing the homes of villagers in Nkonkweni who refused to comply with the South African government's decision to give their land to Ciskei, one of the 4 homelands where blacks have been forcibly relocated. In October, a state of emergency forbidding outsiders to enter the area was declared. This home video, secretly shot from an airplane, shows the aftermath of the destruction. Sebenazile Tuwana, who had lived in Nkonkweni all his life, witnessed the demolition of his home. This is what he told us.
We were given notice of the intended action 10 minutes before the homes were demolished. Then some people shot and locked their homes. But we didn't. We just stood around and the bulldozers came. The guards, they told us to empty our homes. We just gave in. We were tracked out with our furniture. The people who were present during that day just feared for their lives.
850 residents evicted from their homes fled to the neighboring village of King Williamstown, where 2 churches gave them food and shelter. The struggle to retain their South African citizenship was met by brutal harassment by the Ciskei police, evictions, tear gassing, gunfire, and beatings. This 12-year-old boy, Levuya Beja, was detained without charge with 5 other children who were stripped, starved, and assaulted before their release. Intervention by Frank Chikane of the South African Council of Churches, local organizing, and international attention pressured the South African government to finally agree to resettle the displaced residents in an area in South Africa, just outside their former home. Dean T.S. Farisani, who comes from the independent homeland of Venda, puts the Nkonkweni settlement into perspective.
The South African government was forced, and because of international outcry, to give them pieces of land, which cannot begin to compensate the people for the land which they know, the land that they've loved, the land that they developed, the land on which they built their homes. And again, this lies at the tragedy of the evil of apartheid, to try to divide South Africa into many so-called nations and homelands. South Africa is one country, and the only solution is not forced incorporation, is for the South African government to stop dividing our country and accept the concept of one united, non-racial, democratic South Africa, where everybody belongs.
This is Nadia Smith for South Africa Now.
This week in our Namibia Watch, Joseph Disho talks with South Africa Now researcher Alan Roberts, who just returned from Namibia.
Namibia Watch researcher Alan Roberts was in Namibia for the recent elections. He tells us Even as Namibia's new Constituent Assembly begins its work of forging a new constitution, there is an undercurrent of unrest that they experience firsthand.
One instance, briefly, was a meeting with COVATU, the former counter-insurgency unit led by the South Africans. They were very hostile to any questions about them. If you basically were a press person or from the United Nations, they considered you to be on the side of SWAPO. In my instance, I was, after 2 or 3 questions, told to leave and was chased basically to my car by COVATU and told to get out with stones being thrown behind me. If they had a car, no doubt, like numerous other people, church and journalists, I'd have been chased and maybe even shot at, as have numerous people recently being in the area of the north, shot at, chased and intimidated with violence by COVATU. These people are under no control of the South Africans or any police organisation which they formerly were in. They're loose now, they say they have guns, and they say are waiting for UNTAC and the UN to leave, then we'll get SWAPO. That's what COVATU is saying.
There's also news here in the United States. In New York, charges were dropped against 28 demonstrators arrested while protesting the decision by Manufacturers Hanover Trust to renegotiate loan agreements with South Africa. Phillip Tomlinson has the story.
They emerged from the courthouse feeling victorious and vowed to continue protesting Manufacturers Hanover's involvement in South Africa.
We made a strong statement, and our statement will continue to be to Manufacturers Hanover that we're going to be on your doorstep until you break your ties to South Africa, and we're going to be pressuring the city to cut off its ties to Manufacturers Hanover's.
They were arrested in early October and charged with civil disobedience after protesting in front of this New York Manufacturers Hanover Bank, denouncing its financial involvement in South Africa. Manufacturers Hanover is part of a consortium of banks which has decided to extend $11 billion in loans to South Africa. Donna Katzin spearheads the campaign.
We feel that the bank should be reinvesting in our communities here in this city instead of bankrolling South Africa.
Manufacturers Hanover declined to appear on camera. Ironically, the bank said, like the protesters, it too is against apartheid, and that it only pressed charges because they were blocking its entrance. For South Africa Now, this is Phillip Tomlinson reporting.
This is Joe Conason. Here at New York City Hall, Manufacturers Hanover has been leading an effort to stop passage of a stronger local sanctions law. But the bank and other opponents now confront a new black mayor who says he will push to close loopholes in the current statute. That was the message at a ceremony to mark the opening of the United Nations Special Session on Apartheid. Dinkins has been trying to strengthen the law for over a year. The new bill's original city council sponsor, Ruth Messenger, explained why action has been delayed.
There were lobbying efforts. The New York City Chamber of Commerce and Industry wanted to weaken the bill. There were people speaking on behalf of the banking industry, urging another form of weakening of the bill. And at the same time, there were some of us who were urging passage of a stronger piece of legislation with some additional amendments.
Business leaders reply that the additional restrictions would unfairly penalize them for honoring existing contracts. They want a grace period before the new sanctions take effect. Because New York City spends and deposits more than $20 billion a year, much of it in major financial institutions, tighter local sanctions could have a broad impact. And, as activists hope and bankers fear, the city's example could lead to stricter laws in other localities around the country. This is Joe Conason for South Africa Now.
Recently, South Africa Now commentator Randall Robinson was red-baited following a visit to Angola. Conservative Utah Senator Orrin Hatch attempted to brand Robinson a communist for meeting with officials of the Angolan government. Now this red-baiting is taking a new form. That's the topic of this week's commentary.
Washington is still not fully recovered from the days of McCarthyism and the lists that sought to punish people for speaking their minds, labeling them communists or traitors. Now the new right is targeting the news media and socially concerned entertainers by distributing smear sheets disguised as insider newsletters. One called Media Watch tries guilt by association tactics against reporters. This recent issue attacks ABC News for describing the African National Congress of South Africa as a legitimate nationalist movement. It says ABC is soft on the ANC because it doesn't take the South African government line, which accuses the liberation movement of being terrorist. A new bi-monthly sheet by the same crowd, called TV Etc., goes after so-called leftist actors and rock stars. One example is an attack on musician Little Steven and his Sun City anti-apartheid record, because he sought to link the idea of fighting racism in South Africa with fighting racism here at home. Publications like these are distributed widely to the media and entertainment industries. They could hurt artists' careers. People for the American Way has already called it what it is, a backhanded way of establishing new banning lists. Unfortunately, there's nothing backhanded about it. That's my view. I'd be interested in yours. I'm Randall Robinson of TransAfrica for South Africa Now.
You're watching South Africa Now, the television news magazine that goes behind the headlines.
FW de Klerk announced this week mandatory military service for South Africa's whites will be cut in half, from 2 years to 1. De Klerk made his announcement at the new Pretoria headquarters of AMSCO, the giant state-run weapons manufacturer created to circumvent a worldwide arms boycott. South Africa now has obtained an AMSCO sales tape never intended for television audiences that provides an inside look at South Africa's military-industrial complex. Like a Hollywood production, it's slick and expensive, though the guns in this movie shoot real bullets. We call it Lethal Weapon 3.
You are watching a war movie produced by arms makers for arms buyers. This is a sales tape for Armscorp, the Armaments Corporation of South Africa. Obtained by South Africa Now, it shows off the hardware that South Africa's weapons makers have produced to evade a worldwide United Nations arms embargo.
Armscorp's first function is to provide all the armaments and military equipment South Africa needs as efficiently and economically as possible.
90,000 people work for Pretoria's Weapons Goliath, serving an international market. 26 nations covertly buy the 27 different weapon systems they produce, from machine guns to heavy artillery. Would you buy a tank from these people?
From whatever angle you look at it, the creative combination of government and private enterprise which characterizes Armscorp tells a story of growth, development, increasing capability, and often astonishing achievement. Goaded by the limited arms embargo of 1964 and the total embargo of 1977, reinforced by the strength of its government backing, stimulated by the traditional efficiency and inventiveness of private enterprise, and making the fullest use of the most sophisticated techniques in the management of human, financial, and material resources, Armscorp and its subsidiaries have, in a remarkably short time, built up an armaments industry almost from scratch, changing South Africa's nearly total reliance on imported armaments into a virtual self-sufficiency, and creating along the way some of the world's most advanced, most battle-tried weapon systems, designed, developed, and manufactured from the ground up to the most exacting specifications of the South African Defense Force.
Armscorp has showcased its military hardware in arms bazaars from Athens, Greece to Santiago, Chile. It is one of the top 10 arms producers in the world, with international revenues of $900 million a year. Abdul Minty heads the campaign to end military collaboration with South Africa.
They were able to sell quite a lot of weapons in the Gulf War to both Iran and Iraq, and I think they are over-encouraged by the possibility of that market, using the slogan for their arms deals that all their arms have been tested in combat.
However, the final test is not on the test range or in the laboratory, but on the battlefield.
Minty told a UN panel that South Africa's outlaw status often forces it to market its weapon systems in surreptitious ways. The South African origin of the mighty G5 cannon, used to pound targets in Angola for years, was disguised through the use of third countries. Here's how one deal worked. Armscorp sold the parts of the G5 to a firm in Chile, which then marketed it to Turkey and Iraq.
And we failed to get an assurance from the government of Iraq that it will not buy from Chile these items. And we've also failed to get such assurances from Turkey.
For every job Arms Corps creates within its own organization, it generates 6 to 8 jobs in the private sector. Measure and countermeasure. This is the rhythm of arms production. And Arms Corps must always be in step, must always keep pace with the world's leaders. One way or another, whether in size, capability, or versatility, Arms Corps' future will be one of growth, development, and improvement, so as to be ever ready to provide both the know-how and the means for South Africans to defend their rapidly evolving society against any attack.
Through videos like this, Arms Corps hopes to expand its share of the international weapons market. We are sending this tape to Hollywood in hopes that it might be the basis for another blockbuster. This is Eric Nadler for South Africa Now.
You're watching South Africa Now. Coming up next, our culture segment, featuring the best music, film, drama, and artistic expression from Southern Africa.
Through song and dance, the new South African musical, Gori, explores the issue of apartheid as well as the meaning of the African experience. Drawing from a wide range of African music and dance styles, Gori seems to be the perfect vehicle for its star and choreographer, Nomsa Manaka. Meet Nomsa, a woman in search of her identity. She is the lead character in a new South African musical called Gori. Making its American premiere in New York City, the play received critical acclaim during its run in South Africa.
In the same house.
Gori is the name of the island where captured Africans were held before being shipped off to the Americas as slaves. After a long journey from Johannesburg, Nomsa, a dancer, finds herself on Gori with a spiritual healer who reaffirms the value of a cultural heritage, which is illustrated through song and dance. The star of the play and the characters seem to have much in common. Not only do they share the same name, but their experiences are quite similar.
I find I've learned quite a lot in my experience of traveling, meeting people, because I didn't get like a formal training in dance, and because I had this thing that I wanted to be a dancer. I don't know what it was, but I had it inside me that I wanted to be a dancer. I attend a lot of workshops, and that way, I learn. I see how people work, and I would go back home, teach my students, of what I have learned, my experiences, and I would share my experience with them, and they would take that and learn also and pass it on further.
Heavily influenced with African motifs, the production numbers also draw from ballet, modern dance, and jazz.
There's a lot of information, there's a lot of history behind it, It educates the people here, even back home. A lot of people didn't know what Gore is, what's the meaning of Gore, what is that? Even here, well, what's exciting is after the show, people tell us that I'm educated, I know something about Africa, I know something about myself.
Each time I think I found something to make me happy, something to make me what I want to be. It slips out of my life like air out of a balloon. Will I ever find myself? Will I ever be what I want to be? Will I ever be an African dancer?
This play is not for only black South Africans, it's for everybody, whether black or white. Because a lot of South Africans, after the show, they used to come backstage and say, we're glad that, we know how it is to be a South African now. We know who we are also, And that's one sat down and said, oh, yeah, and people are saying they're very excited that this is a different show, in a sense that it's not this thing of we're suffering, we are this, we are that, people screaming, crying all the time, you know, it actually involved everybody.
The drum. And out of the drum, the liberation dance was born, and Africa celebrated!
At the end of the play, Oba gives Nomsa a gift, the knowledge of her culture. It liberates her and gives her the strength to return to Johannesburg to do the liberation dance.
Thank you for watching South Africa Now. We'd like to welcome our viewers in Nashville, Tennessee, not on the public television station, where there is an ongoing debate about whether or not to carry the show, but instead on a cable outlet that is carrying the program with funds donated by local residents. We would also like to thank UTA Airlines, which provided transportation that enabled us to send a crew to Paris. If you're interested in any of the issues we cover, send a self-addressed stamped envelope to South Africa Now, P.O. Box 1907, Canal Street Station, New York, New York 10013. South Africa Now is produced by Global Vision on a non-profit basis in association with the Africa Fund. Next week, South Africa Now's special year-end review. We'll tell you our top 10 stories of 1989.
I said to Mr. de Klerk, Mr. President, Mr. Acting President, I have asked whether you're just another Foster, another Botha, or are you the Joshua we have been waiting for? You don't have more than 2 years to give us that answer. If you don't, that explosion I've been talking about will take place. It will make the French Revolution look like a Sunday morning children's picnic.
On behalf of everyone at South Africa Now, I'm Fana Kekana. See you next week.